you a woman in medicine feeling overwhelmed and disconnected from the personal fulfillment that you desire? You're in the right place. Join doctors Joanne and Aaron as they rewrite the rules for women in medicine. Let's begin.
Sometimes the hardest part of medicine happens after the patient leaves the room. You finished the visit, you documented the note, you moved on to the next patient, but your body didn't. Some encounters don't end when the appointment does. They follow you into the hallway, into your car, into how you speak with your family, and into the silence you need at the end of the day. There's a term for this: emotional hangover. In this episode, I'll be talking with my co host, Dr. Joanne Sotelo, psychiatrist and coach, to talk about what it costs when we don't acknowledge it and what becomes possible when we do. Joanne, I can't wait to dive into this subject. And from your perspective, what's happening inside of us after a difficult patient encounter, even when we look calm and composed on the outside?
This is a topic that I think of so much. And part of it because I've been a psychiatrist for so long. I was sharing in one of our previous podcasts that I wonder what's happened to my brain after I've been sitting down with so many difficult stories that I have to stay present for. And, and I always also thinking about how in med school, they teach students you need to treat everyone the same. Like you need to be neutral, which is a good concept as a whole. And I can speak to that as a psychiatrist from a teaching perspective. But this is what we have to pay attention to, that we can have like kind of like a box of tools that we use to treat patients, but the awareness and the compassion that we're not going to feel the same after every patient encounter, even with situations that are similar. And that's lingering emotional, mental, and physical residue. It's what we're calling the emotional hangover. And we think of it would make sense and intense, right? Like if you have someone who's crashing or like a bad outcome, that makes sense. But it can happen in subtle times, like even when you're seeing someone who reminds you of something that you went through, or someone who looks like someone you love. And of course, then it does happen if a patient is sharing a traumatic event, or like if the patient has a strong emotion, like they're very angry, devastated. And so many of us are having to talk to our patients about a terminal diagnosis or something that's very complicated. And or like I've had to deal so often of someone who's very hopeless and suicidal, or like I imagine you had to deal with, Erin, as a pediatrician, and when a child is suffering, and our tools only takes us so long. So again, I'm giving you different examples because our perfectionistic brain thinks like, no, I'm strong, I'm supposed to deal with all these things. Like it makes sense if it's like a bad outcome, but we don't pay attention that these other interactions can also linger, and they drain our mental and emotional energy so much. And we can't ignore it. And we're so trained to go from deal with it very quickly, move on. Right. And like you said, it stays with us, and sometimes even the people around us will notice it even more than we do. And we cannot minimize it. We cannot just say, or like, oh, whatever, I'm just having a hard day. And we need to really have all those tools, because we are in difficult situations all the time. And just because you can handle it doesn't mean that you're processing it completely, or that it's not going to leave that residue, that emotional hangover that we're talking about. And the kind of the doctor programming that we talk so much about, that it tells us just, move on. You're supposed to suppress it and not feel it. And that expectation is just not nice to us. Not it doesn't have empathy or compassion, right? Like we're human. We are human. That's our number one role.
And that term of residue, it gives me this crisp visual about how many patients are you seeing that day, and the cumulative effect of residue from patient 1, and now you walk into patient 2 and 3, and maybe there's residue from something else going on in your own life, and then you're just going into the next, and it just makes me think how much residue builds up at the end of each day. It's very powerful. And we both know from working with women physicians and from coaching many women in medicine, women work through medicine differently and we carry our emotions differently. Point out for us what that extra weight is and why it's even more important for women in medicine who are carrying this. And then walk straight into the second shift, which is that additional caregiving once they walk through that door at home.
And you said it clearly, this unprocessed emotional residue, this hangover, doesn't go away just because our shift ended or our clinic ended, right? Like it stays with us. And we've talked about it before, how emotions show up different for us, right? Like it's not the typical worrying very clearly or depression or anxiety, even burnout, right? Like we talked about that before. But like you said, especially when we go home, pay attention to how edgy or irritable you are, or to me, in a way worse, where you're just numb, where you're kind of isolated, disconnected. Are you having difficulty sleeping, or that a lot of emotional eating? Are you in horrible anticipation for the next day, or even resentful? You're having headaches, body tension, so many different things that how it can show up, and we just almost always minimize it, like, "Oh, I'm just tired," or "It'll go away, it's part of the job." And it's even more complicated, like you were asking, for women in medicine, because we are socialized to be emotionally available everywhere, and we put ourselves last, right? So if they ask us something at work, our home, our partners, our children, our aging parents, frequently we put them first, and that's what we believe it's the right thing to do. So even if when we do have awareness of, man, today was a hard day, I need to process some of this, you might not even give yourself permission to, or find the time to do so, or the support to do so. So it's very important, and it adds up, and we cannot ignore it, and it doesn't always show up in consciously of, oh, I am having a hard day because I had this difficult patient 3 days ago, right? Like we might just be unable to concentrate and finish our charts on time, which adds to this emotional hangover. And I'm having like a side thought in here that, I have to admit, maybe in my own emotional hangover, that I will sometimes like watch Instagram or stuff like that. And because of my algorithm, I see a lot of doctor kind of posting. And there's been kind of sweet posts and I see also a lot of psychological posts as well, but it's kind of this idea that a lot of doctors are cold, or they don't care, or they just want to clock in and out. And then the posts are kind of showing your doctor thinking about you afterwards. And then, right, like the doctor is eating, and then there's the caption of, "I wonder if my patient is recovering well. I wonder if they're still in that much pain. I wonder if they're still having those hopeless thoughts," or right. And that's kind of like a beautiful thing in how we care. But then we still have to be careful, because it's not about not caring, it's about processing that caring and our emotional, very human reaction, without beating yourself up. Because this is the other thing that we hear so much in coaching of, right, like, because we create this safe place where they can start talking about it, and then you hear the but, like, oh, but I shouldn't be this sensitive. That's weak. I should be able to handle this. Other people have it worse, which, right, like, we're not challenging the thought, but it's minimizing your emotion, and it's getting in the way of your processing, and in knowing, kind of, I'm going to repeat myself, that this is so appropriate, and that it's okay, and that there's tools, and we need to learn how to kind of metabolize a lot of these emotions, and that there are patients that will stay with you, right? Like, I have vivid memories of patients I saw literally 20 years ago, right? And it's not necessarily that I handled it incorrectly. It's just because, for whatever reason, it stayed with us. And it's knowing how to have that awareness, and having kind of techniques to process that, and have supervision, or a colleague, or coaching, right? All those good things that we always talk about, because our nervous system is keeping tab, and we don't want it to show up later on in other ways.
And I want to highlight this because maybe our listener hasn't listened to all of our episodes. And we have pointed out the differences in how men and women practice medicine. And I just want to highlight that emotional load. Women bring the emotional load home with them, and much more often. That's what the research shows. Whereas the men, oftentimes they get home and their workday's done. It's not on their radar, and they're shifting into I'm done mode. I'm done with work. And so I think about this double whammy for women. We bring more of the emotion from the day's load home with us. And then we're slammed with that second shift of managing the household and the kids and the aging parents and all that. And I would love to hear, how are we supposed to process these moments, Joanne, without carrying all these hard encounters into the next patient we see or into our other relationships?
There is a tool in coaching that's pretty universal, that it's learning to name our emotions. And I would transfer that here to naming the encounter before you move on. And this is like a different way to talk about awareness. And this is, I teach self-compassion, which is such a difficult concept for women in medicine. And this is a beautiful example of self-compassion. And by naming it, it could be, man, that was hard. That was heavy. I felt that one a little bit more. Or even, I need to take a moment to just breathe before my next patient. And just that naming of the experience gives you that pause, and that break, and the awareness, and the self-compassion to remind yourself you're human, and these are very appropriate emotions. And that doesn't mean that then, right, like, you're going to come crashing down and not be able to go see the next person. It's right, like, it's this pauses that can make a big difference. And then with that, also create some transition ritual. And it could be, depending on the situation, it could be bigger or smaller, but I've talked about this before, and these are also burnout prevention tools of literally between one patient and the other, have some cheesy thought of, I am letting go of the next person, of the previous energy, and I'm going to take a deep breath to show up at my best for the next one. Things like that, like deep breaths. Use the time that you're washing your hands in between patients to say, okay, I'm checking in, energy reset. And that practice is so beautiful, and it'll help you get grounded, so that we can do that for everything, right? Like, we talk about transitions all the time. This third step is huge. We need to stop judging the emotional response, because the goal is not, again, I'm not saying at all be neutral. It's almost the opposite, is feel it, be aware, and know that it's appropriate, and that have compassion with yourself to know that some patients are going to feel heavier for you than for other people. Like, I remember I was going to say that at the beginning, but it really still affects me. Like, there's times that I helped someone through grief, but especially like soon after my dad passed away, like I would say like 80, 90% of the time I could show up as always in my very empathic self. And then there were some times that I was flooded with emotion that I could tell were mostly mine, that I was reminded of my loss in front of a patient. And I, just gave myself permission to feel it. Or there might be this, an old couple that are super cute. And then you just, right, like you feel a little bit more. It's so many examples that we can think of here. And don't judge yourself. That should be tattooed in in our foreheads. Um, this one is also important, especially if it's something bigger that happened, which is debrief safely. And it could be with a colleague, it could be with someone you trust. And we know that if you reset a sense of safety after a difficult situation, it rewires your brain. And I'll share, I remember the father of my kids is an interventional cardiologist, and sometimes there are negative outcomes. And he's your typical tough cardiologist. And he would always call me just to share I'm feeling all emotional about it, because like I could hear the vulnerable side of him just having to talk about the negative outcome. And then he's like, and now I have to go talk to the family, right? And I mean, that's kind of a more intense situation. But we all have probably within ourselves a colleague, a friend who's had a negative outcome with a patient, and that wasn't expected. It wasn't that anything went wrong. It's just, unfortunately, it's part of what we do. And then we need to debrief. It could be, I've had it where I have someone show up super angry and yelling at me, literally like yelling and making a scene. And those are difficult to handle, even with all the tools I have as a psychiatrist. And or I would hear, and Erin, I imagine this happened to you too, of like so many very painful experiences of trauma that some of our patients have, right? Like I could tell those are heavier. I need a break and I need to talk to someone about it, of course, protecting privacy. And sometimes it could just be, in general, I just had a very difficult situation. I just need a minute here. Just can you stand with me? So that debrief is very, very important. And then, which is part of why Erin and I do this podcast and we coach, we have to watch for the accumulation. So if you're thinking, wow, I've been practicing for decades and I haven't been doing these things that you're talking about, I wonder what's going on. Kind of go back and think of what are some of the things that drain me in what I do? Like, how am I doing emotionally? And I think that this is kind of where asking for help, getting a coach, even talking to a therapist would be beneficial, because you might be carrying an emotional and mental load that's not yours. That could be just years of unprocessed emotions that then we carry with us in our personal life too. And it can create a problem. So again, talking with a lot of compassion, and we all have this. The truth is that we all have accumulated stress and tough stories and difficult situations in practicing medicine. So it's worth talking about it without feeling guilty or shame, and knowing that in that connection, in that processing, we're healing even things that happened in the past.
Such powerful tools that you shared, Joanne. And I just had a conversation recently with a friend, and we talked about some of these issues. And I think about, as you move through painful parts of your life and the residue building up, and how some critical debriefs and checking in with other people. So, thinking about my friends who are single and they don't have a partner, I have a built in person that I can debrief with, that I can share hard things with. And that helps me recover for individuals who don't have a partner, who don't have a trusted person or a community, and they're trying to do it on their own. And so I think of that, there's like a lack of a cleansing piece in their life to help remove some of those particles. And so I would challenge our listener to think about, who do you have? And if you don't have that ability in your current support circle, encourage you to go find it and not, try to do it on your own, because we've talked about this before. You have one person, one number, there's no math you can do. You add one other person in your circle, now you're at least double capacity, sometimes exponentially more capable, just by having that other person in your circle. I can't stress that enough. And you've given us so much great information, Joanne. Is there one more golden nugget of information you'd like to share with our listener about this topic of emotional hangover?
Something else that come to mind, because we talk so much about central nervous system regulation and burnout recovery. We can build in throughout our day the same tools that we talked about that help us with our mood and with burnout can be very helpful with this. So it could be closing your eyes for 2 minutes, going to the bathroom and washing your hands with cold water, or taking a break without your phone. Doing kind of, this is a little bit more sophisticated, but kind of doing like a quick body scan of, is there any tension that I feel? Like you can start focusing on different parts of your body. So it's like, where am I holding the tension today? And just breathe into it. Taking deep breaths, like we talk, I think, in every um, podcast that we record. All of this could be very beneficial. And if you're doing it with the intent of processing the emotion of the day, that's added bonus. So don't minimize how helpful these tools can be for your overall system and everyone around you.
So many tools, and they're not complicated. And I love that reminder about kind of creating some habits and rituals on a daily basis to help with the sustainability of a practice in medicine. And with that, if you are needing more support and more resources, you can come find us at createmeaninginmedicine.com. Send us a message, and we would love to have you stay tuned, because our next episode is coming right up.
Do you want exclusive resources and the opportunity to connect with us? Then visit createmeaninginmedicine.com now, where you'll dive deeper into how you can create meaning in medicine. And if you're serious about optimizing your results, take 2 quick steps now. Connect with us on the website and tune in to the next episode.